Please be seated. This is a curious and holy time of the year, when light and darkness seem to negotiate their terms with one another, appearing and disappearing, arriving and retreating in almost imperceptible measures. Earlier this morning, just after we began our service at 10:03, the solstice quietly passed. The longest night reached its fullness, and now, minute by minute, the light begins its slow return. It does not arrive all at once. There is no announcement, no dramatic shift, just a silent turning. Here at 42 degrees north, we know what the turning of the earth brings. When the sun does appear, it rides low in the sky, stretching things out, pulling long silhouettes across sidewalks and walls. This is the season of shadows. Or at least it would be if we happened to see the sun, of course. Now I'm being made a liar. Today, of course, the weather suggested in western New York that we be full of wintry clouds and wind and snow, and that would be how we would know what time of year it is. Still, lest I be accused of throwing shade on our beloved climate, let me remind you of this past Thursday, when the sun burst forth and the temperature flirted with the mid-50s. Oh, what a tease. By the next morning, it was frigid again. But on that day, looking out my office window, I was greeted by one of my favorite sights. The shadow of our bell tower's 4 turrets, sharply contrasted on the back of the property match building just here on 5th and Main Street. Solid stone transformed into outline and silhouette. Presence revealed through absence. And it made me wonder, what do we learn about something by looking at its shadow? What becomes visible when we stop insisting on seeing the whole thing at once, right now, in all of its entirety? What if we were to look patiently? What then is revealed? Shadows have always fascinated us. They are not nothing, but they are not quite the thing itself. They hint at a deeper reality, just out of view. Sometimes they reveal what we would rather keep hidden, the truer shape of things, the parts of ourselves we don't easily name and certainly don't post to social media. Sometimes they deceive us. Plato imagined prisoners mistaking shadows on a cave wall for reality itself, confusing illusion for truth. Sometimes shadows act as doubles, another self that follows us, reminding us of some inner conflict, of who we've been and who we are becoming. Think of Peter Pan, for instance, and his shadow, always tugging at him, reminding him that time was growing and growth were calling, that he cannot remain a child forever. I wonder what shadows are following you these days. What do they seem to be saying? Yes, sometimes shadows carry a sense of foreboding, a long shape stretching out ahead of us, hinting that something is coming, whether we're ready or not. We even speak of diminishment in this way, that we might be only a shadow of oneself, less weight, less substance, less light. And yet, shadows only exist where there is light. There are no shadows on a cloudy day, we know. Shadows depend on light. They testify to the light. A shadow is not the absence of God's presence, but often the sign that something solid, something real, something bright is nearby. just at an angle we cannot yet see fully. The psalmist nails it today. Show us the light of your countenance, and we shall be saved. So perhaps the question is not, how do we get rid of the shadows that plague us? But rather, what light? What light might they be standing just out of view and hinting at? Shadows in this way, then, are a kind of sign. And sometimes signs prompt us into action. Although stop signs don't usually prompt me into action. As I was watching those turrets and their shadows on Thursday, I realized something very practical. The angle of the winter sun meant that for part of the year, that there are certain valleys here on the church roof that will never, ever receive the sunlight. Snow just accumulates there. Ice forms. Meltwater finds its way inside. With warm weather and rain in the forecast, curiosity quickly turned into concern. So I did what only the most foolhardy rector with a lingering Peter Pan complex, no Tinkerbell and no fairy dust would do. I got a ladder out and climbed on the roof. What I found was not inspiration at all, but a stark winter landscape. Ice ridges, wind-sculpted drifts, snowbanks 4 feet deep. I thought I should have brought an ice axe and some crampons, but I didn't have any. I made my way up above the sacristy, kind of right over there, if you look just that way, trying to figure out where the water eeps in. You can see there's a little bit of area right under the window there of John with the chalice, where you can see a little white coming through the blue. It's been painted already. Water always gets in right there. I was trying to figure out how and why, and what does the snow get to? How do we fix this thing? So I climbed up to look, and what I found was not clarity, but complexity. A thick blanket of snow, much too high. And instead of pausing to pray or stepping back to think and consider the situation, I decided, heroically, foolishly, that I would solve the problem myself. So I headed back down and grabbed a shovel, went back up, and started clearing the snow. Anybody that happened to drive down the alley on Friday or on Thursday, anybody whose car got stuck, that was me. So I started clearing snow, and I kept going, and I got focused. Maybe a little obsessed, I'll admit. I only stopped long enough to call Jessica on the phone to see if she would cover the noon Eucharist service that I was supposed to be leading as the bell was tolling noon. All so I could keep shoveling. She agreed, thankfully. 3.5 hours later, after what Google assures me was probably several thousand pounds of snow, and my back also readily attests to, even days later, I had to stop. Not because the work was finished, but because I had reached the limits of what one determined person with a shovel could accomplish. And the roof was still not bare, heavily covered in certain sections. The problem is still there, sitting there today. Standing on that roof, I realized something rather uncomfortable. How often do we mistake exertion for discernment? How often do we try to solve what we are actually being called to simply observe? Before climbing down, soaking wet, socks squishing, late for a meeting with the bishop in Buffalo, I finally did what I probably should have done earlier. I asked God for a sign. Not a miraculous melting of the snow. God, please, not that. Keep it frozen for a while. But just some hint of how this problem might actually be addressed. As I drove to Buffalo, trying unsuccessfully to dry my socks on the dashboard vents, I found myself thinking about today's reading from Isaiah and the shadow it casts on the gospel. Isaiah is speaking into a moment thick with anxiety, more anxiety than water getting into a building. No, this is a king under threat, an empire approaching, certain death. And God offers Ahaz a sign, any sign, deep as Sheol and high as heaven. But Ahaz refuses. He already thinks he knows how the story will end. He's already decided that there is no hope. So God gives him a sign anyway. Not an army, not a strategy, a child, a pregnancy, a future that must be waited for. It is, at first, only the merest shadow of a hope, a promise yet unfulfilled, a present not yet fully visible. And Matthew, centuries later, stands in that same shadow. Lord, show us the light of your countenance, and we shall be saved. And so he tells the story of Jesus not as a clean break from the past, but as a continuation, an outline taking on flesh, a shadow now with features. He reaches back to Isaiah and says, this is that. The shadow has substance now. The sign has a name. Emmanuel, God with us, Jesus. But even then, the story does not rush toward brightness and all being right with the world. No, Joseph learns what he learns in a dream. If you stop and think about what that means, we don't often sit in that story of what it means to hear some rather dreadful news. We can make jokes about the milkman and what might paternity tests look like, but this is deeply concerning. When your integrity, when your name was all you had, we're talking about being utterly abandoned. Joseph hears in a dream what's going on in the dark. And then he acts without full understanding. He trusts something he cannot yet clearly see. So let me ask you, what in your life right now feels not quite finished? What do you not know enough about that you're dragging your feet to decide? Where are you being asked to trust a promise that you could only see the vaguest outline of? That is Advent faith. It's not about certainty or control, but about attentiveness to shadows. Learning to recognize when they are pointing us towards something that's real. Standing on the roof on Thursday, I did not receive a lightning bolt of clarity, but I did receive something quieter. The recognition that some problems cannot be solved by effort alone. That some signs are an invitation to patience, collaboration, and taking time. The return of light after the solstice is not dramatic. You didn't even notice until I told you. It's measured in seconds, but it is sure and constant. It is a literal fact. Today, the light has turned. We may not yet see it. The shadows are still long, but they are changing. And they are telling us something true. The light is nearer than it appears. Advent, you see, trains us to notice that to trust God often comes to us not in blinding clarity, but in outline, in silhouette. That God comes to us in promise and anticipation, not by eliminating the shadow, but by inhabiting it. And that perhaps the invitation this day, with the solstice, the turning of the season, and the fourth Sunday of Advent, is not to banish the shadows or to try and solve them by sheer effort alone, but to stay with them long enough to learn what they're pointing us toward, to notice how they shift, to pay attention to what they reveal. Because the Christian claim is not that God waits for perfect light before showing up, resplendent in glory. The claim is far stranger and far more hopeful than that. that God shows up in the dark, in an empty manger, in a backwater town, in the middle of nowhere. Emmanuel, God with us, even here, even now, even in whatever shadows you may be sitting this morning. God is with us. Yes, here and now, in the long, slanting light of Advent. And maybe the faithful response in this season is not to trust first in our own efforts, our own strength, or our own cleverness, but rather to cultivate the patience to see differently, to discover that shadows themselves can be signs, signs that God is already at work, signs that grace is already falling across our lives at an angle we had not expected, and illuminating what is real, what is enduring, and what is still becoming. The light is returning, quietly, faithfully, and God is already with us. Emmanuel. Amen. Standing in body or in spirit, please join me